The band struck a brass-heavy riff, the kind that told the audience to cheer, to laugh, to lean in. Bright studio lights burned over polished wood floors, catching the smiles of hundreds of faces crammed into rows of seats. It was late night in Los Angeles, but in this room it felt like noon. Energy everywhere. No shadows allowed. The cameras glided like black birds on their tracks, cutting angles, snapping close-ups, chasing the rhythm of applause. Jimmy Kimmel leaned forward behind his desk, chin tilted, grin wide, eyes twinkling like he'd already rehearsed the next punchline 3 times in his head. Across from him, in the guest chair, sat a man who didn't move much at all. His hands rested, almost folded, on his knees. His posture was steady, not stiff, like a mountain that had grown used to weather. The audience knew him instantly. Of course they did. He'd been a fixture of screens decades ago, his face stamped onto posters where fists and fire exploded behind him. A cultural meme later turned into a punchline that lived in emails, t-shirts, and social media feeds. Now he was here, in the bright circus of late-night television, his presence as unusual as if someone had dragged an old monument onto the stage. Chuck Norris. Kimmel wasted no time. He leaned into his next line with the rhythm of a man who had the crowd in his pocket. "He smiles, ladies and gentlemen," Jimmy said, pointing toward his guest. "But don't be fooled. This man once made a career kicking through plywood walls." The audience laughed politely, warming up. Then Jimmy let the pause linger, his timing sharpened like a blade. And now he's here, proving to all of us that even legends have to get out of the house sometimes. The laugh was bigger this time, rolling through the seats. Kimmel felt it, rode it, and then threw the sharper dart. "Chuck Norris," he said, eyes flashing toward the camera, "is just a long-running joke with a beard." The audience cracked open like glass shattering. Laughter, whistles, the sudden burst of applause that people give when they're told something daring but safe. The band riffed again, cymbals quick, trumpets cutting, like punctuation on the line. Jimmy laughed with them, shaking his head, basking in the energy. But then the camera, obedient, ruthless, shifted to Chuck. The smile never reached his mouth. His eyes, steady and pale, stayed on Jimmy like nothing around them mattered. Not the lights, not the applause, not the millions of people who would watch this clip tomorrow at their desks. He didn't blink fast. He didn't twitch. The audience in their noise missed it, but the camera caught it. The director knew what he was doing. He zoomed in just enough to show the stillness, the quiet refusal in Chuck's face. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, it felt like silence dropped over the studio. The laugh wavered, uneven. People realized something about this wasn't a gag. Chuck sat back a little, the smallest shift of weight, but it was enough to turn the air. Jimmy, still grinning, looked at him and realized that his punchline hadn't landed on a cushion. It had hit something that didn't move. The crowd, trained to cheer, tried to start clapping again, filling the gap with safe noise, but a few in the audience, older faces, men with gray hair, women who remembered the films from the 70s, didn't clap. They watched. Their expressions didn't laugh. They saw a different man on that stage, not the meme, not the joke. The band slowed, waiting for the host to take the reins back. Jimmy tapped his pen against the desk, smiling harder, filling the pause. "Come on, Chuck," he said. "Don't tell me you've never heard one of those jokes before. You're like the godfather of internet nonsense. Indestructible, unbeatable. People still believe it." His tone was bright, playful, but it was also a command to the audience. "Keep laughing. Don't let this stall." Chuck didn't nod. He didn't smile. His hand shifted just slightly on his knee, fingers curling once, then still. His gaze never moved off Jimmy. And in that moment, the room remembered that silence can be louder than any trumpet riff. Jimmy swallowed. Just once, almost hidden, but the microphone on his collar was merciless. The soundboard caught it. Faint, but real. He leaned forward like he was closing the gap, but his voice trailed for half a second, uncertain. He reached for another joke, something easier, safer. But before he could launch it, Chuck tilted his head. Barely. The kind of tilt you'd miss if you weren't looking straight at him. His eyes, steady as stone, didn't waver. The audience began to hush, one by one, laughter tapering into murmurs, then into the low, restless shifting of seats. The contrast pressed into the space. A host whose whole job was noise, and a guest who brought silence heavy enough to make people uncomfortable. The director didn't cut away. The camera stayed close on Chuck's face. Viewers at home would see it in high definition, in that merciless 4K glare, eyes that weren't joking. Jimmy's grin softened for a second, like a mask slipping. He coughed lightly, tried to chuckle, then forced the crowd back with a clap of his hands. All right, he said, turning to the audience. Don't worry, he won't roundhouse me here on live television. I think the band picked up again, but it sounded hollow now, like a laugh track. Chuck didn't flinch. He let the noise pass. Then finally, he leaned forward, elbows barely lifting off his knees, voice low enough that the microphones had to fight for it. Do you really think this is funny? The audience stopped. The laugh that had been building died in throats. Jimmy opened his mouth, but for the first time that night, no words came right away. The silence didn't feel staged anymore. It felt dangerous. Just wondering. Where are you watching from? Write it down. Bellow. The laugh that had died out didn't return right away. People in the back row shifted in their seats, coughing, clearing throats, as if sound could erase the discomfort. Jimmy adjusted the stack of note cards on his desk, pretending to glance at them, pretending this was the plan all along. His hand trembled once before he caught it and gripped the pen harder. Funny? He echoed, leaning back in his chair, the smile tugging at his mouth but not reaching his eyes. Of course it's funny. That's what people love about you, Chuck. The whole internet thinks you're indestructible. You're, what, 70-something? But hey, still kicking, a quick snort of laughter came from somewhere in the second row, nervous and thin. Jimmy latched onto it, pointing with his pen, urging the audience back to life. Come on, guys, don't get scared. He's not going to knock me out on national TV, right? Right? The crowd laughed, louder this time, obedient but uneven. It wasn't the rolling laughter from before. It had cracks, edges. Some people clapped their hands too hard, desperate to fill the gap. And still, Chuck didn't move. The studio lights bounced off his white shirt, the dark jacket framing him in clean lines. His jaw stayed still, lips pressed in something that wasn't anger, but wasn't amusement either. His eyes, calm, unblinking, watched Jimmy with the patience of someone who'd spent decades letting storms pass around him. Kimmel's grin widened too much, the way a man widens it when he feels it slipping. He tapped his fingers against the desk, each rap sharper than the last. I mean, listen, I grew up on your movies, okay? But let's be honest, they don't exactly hold up. Those fight scenes, man, you could see the stunt doubles half the time, and now you're, what, a meme? The unbeatable Chuck Norris? Roundhouse kicking satellites out of the sky? Come on, even you have to laugh at that. The audience roared, clapping, stomping feet. The band hit a quick sting, trumpets sharp, drums rolling. The energy surged again, but it wasn't unanimous. Older faces in the crowd, people who remembered martial arts theaters, VHS tapes worn thin from rewinding, sat with arms crossed. They didn't smile. They watched Chuck, waiting for something. A younger couple in the front row laughed so hard they slapped each other's shoulders. The division was visible, a ripple through the studio. Half the room chasing the joke, half refusing to play. Chuck's stillness weighed heavier with each line Jimmy threw. The host leaned forward, sensing the split but doubling down, desperate to prove he still had control. So tell me, Chuck, he said, voice bright, how does it feel to be the butt of a million internet jokes? Does it bother you? Or do you just cash the royalty checks and laugh along with the rest of us? The words hung. They were sharp, designed to sting, to corner. The crowd whistled, clapped, waiting for the knockout comeback. Chuck's breathing didn't change. He didn't shift in his chair. For a moment, people thought he might ignore it completely. But then, slowly, he leaned forward. His elbows rested on his knees, his shoulders angled slightly toward the desk. When he finally spoke, it wasn't loud. His voice didn't need to be. The microphones caught it, soft but clear, like gravel smoothed by years of water. Do you really want to know what strength means? The silence that fell afterward was different than before. Not uncomfortable, not tense, heavy, almost reverent. The audience, trained to laugh, to clap, hesitated, caught in the weight of the question. Kimmel blinked. He laughed once, too quickly, a chuckle that cracked. Strength? Buddy, we know what strength means. It means memes. It means internet legends. You're invincible online. But his voice betrayed him. The rhythm faltered, the timing stumbled. For the first time in the segment, the words didn't ride the crowd. The people in the seats felt it. They murmured, a low ripple of sound, confusion mixing with curiosity. Someone near the back muttered, "What did he just say?" And another whispered back, "Shh, listen." Jimmy tapped his cards again, harder this time. His grin was back, wide and forced, but his eyes darted, left, right, toward the camera, then back to Chuck. Chuck didn't flinch. His question still hung in the air, unanswered, like a stone lodged in the throat of the show. The audience felt the shift. Their laughter drained. They leaned forward, waiting, trying to understand if they were supposed to laugh, or clap, or stay silent. The band, usually quick with a riff, sat frozen, their instruments poised, waiting for a signal. The silence stretched, stretching longer than television usually allows. A cough in the third row broke it, then the scrape of a shoe on the studio floor. Jimmy inhaled, opened his mouth to wrestle the moment back. But the cameras caught it, the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. For once, he wasn't steering. Chuck leaned back slightly, not retreating, but resetting. The gesture was subtle, but the message was clear. He wasn't playing along. He was rewriting the rules of the room. And the audience knew it. Some of them sat straighter. Some of them shifted uncomfortably. A group of young men in the balcony chuckled nervously, then hushed themselves when nobody joined. Jimmy's pen clicked twice. He cleared his throat. "All right," he said, voice tight. "Maybe we should get to the real questions. We've got a new book to promote, right? A fitness guide for men who think they can still break boards at 70? He forced a laugh, gesturing to the crowd. "Come on! That's funny! That's funny!" A few claps, scattered, thin. Chuck didn't answer. Not yet. His silence wasn't passive anymore. It pressed into the room, made people aware of their own breathing, their own shifting. The studio, designed for constant noise, suddenly felt like a place where quiet could wound deeper than jokes. And for the first time in years, Jimmy Kimmel, the master of late-night laughter, looked like a man standing on a stage without a script. The crowd sensed it. They weren't sure whether to laugh or to hold their breath. Some of them glanced at each other, eyes wide, whispers quick. "Is this real?" Then Chuck moved again. A small lean, closer to the desk, his eyes locked straight into Jimmy's. The host's grin faltered, just slightly, enough for the cameras to catch. The question from before still echoed, unanswered, swelling in the silence like a drumbeat waiting for the next strike. The question still hung there when Jimmy snapped his cards into a neat pile and forced the smile wider. The laugh lines at his eyes didn't move. He clapped once, too sharp, and pushed his voice toward the rafters. "Strength," he said, with a laugh that sounded practiced. "Let's talk about strength. Mine's monologues. Yours is roundhouse therapy?" He pointed at the band. "Cleto, play him something." A timid guitar riff answered, then cut off when nobody laughed. Heat from the lights pressed down, dry and stinging. People shifted in their seats. Somewhere near the aisle, the powdery smell of perfume floated up and clashed with the faint grease scent from the cameras. Jimmy chuckled at his own line. "Hey, we're just having fun here. People love you. They name their dogs after you. Nobody names a golden retriever, Kimmel." A few polite laughs scattered, thin. Chuck's gaze didn't leave him. Not hostile, not warm. Focused, like he was reading something invisible on Jimmy's face. "Anyway," Jimmy continued, faster now, "you've got a new book. Fitness tips for guys my age, right? Preventative maintenance before the hip replacements kick in." He flashed the cover to a camera that didn't cut close. "Important stuff!" Chuck leaned forward, barely, but enough to shift the air. His voice dropped low, steady. "Do you really want to know what strength means?" The silence was instant, heavier than before. The audience leaned, waiting. Jimmy blinked. He laughed once, cracked. "Buddy, I know what strength is. Ratings, sponsors, keeping this circus going." He leaned in to stretch the line, but Chuck leaned too, closer, their faces caught in a private orbit. The microphones missed what came next. The whisper slipped under the wires. Whatever it was, Jimmy heard it. The smile vanished like a switch flipped. His cheeks tightened. His jaw locked. For a second, his eyes betrayed him. Confusion, then something sharper. The audience didn't know the words, but they knew the aftermath. No band sting, no applause. The studio filled with tiny human sounds. A cough, the rustle of jackets, a phone buzzing, the weight of waiting. Jimmy adjusted his tie, though it didn't need it. His free hand pressed into the desk, knuckles whitening. He stared back at Chuck, mouth half open. He managed finally. "That's interesting." He reached for his mug. Coffee touched his lip. He didn't drink. He set it down too hard, ceramic knocking. The sound echoed. Someone whispered from the balcony, "What did he say?" The answer was just a hush, anticipation building like pressure in a sealed jar. Chuck eased back, posture loose now, hands open on his knees. Steady breathing. Calm. Jimmy laughed again, hollow. If this were a movie, the music would go doom, doom, doom. He wagged a pen at the drummer. Nobody moved. The audience studied Jimmy the way people watch a pilot's face during turbulence. Some leaned forward, curious. Others shrank, uneasy. A few older faces nodded slightly, as if they recognized something unspoken. Jimmy shuffled the cards again. One stuck to his finger. He peeled it off, forcing cheer. "All right, no mysticism. This is ABC. We keep it light." Chuck didn't answer. His head tilted slightly, acknowledging the room, but keeping his focus locked. For a heartbeat, he looked older, not weaker, just stripped of performance. In the second row, a woman clasped her hands without knowing why. Jimmy inhaled hard. "Okay, quick game. I'll read a Chuck Norris fact and you tell me if it's true. First one, Chuck Norris can slam a revolving door." He tossed it like bait. It sank without a ripple. Chuck's gaze didn't move. His voice, quiet, carried anyway. "Strength isn't a trick." The murmur that followed wasn't laughter. It was recognition. The bandleader glanced at Jimmy, waiting, uncertain. Camera lights glowed red and steady, catching everything. Jimmy swallowed again, loud in the mics. His grin twisted, crooked. "All right," he said, voice tight. "We'll take a break, come back, talk about—" "No." Chuck's reply was soft, but final. "You asked." Jimmy's hand hovered over the cards, then retreated. The audience shifted in one motion, like a tide pulling back from shore. The air felt charged, metallic. He opened his mouth, closed it. His face betrayed the flicker of a man weighing whether to keep pretending. "Off the record," he muttered, almost too quiet. Chuck leaned closer, just enough to bridge the last inch. His lips moved, another whisper, shorter this time. Jimmy froze. His eyes widened, unmasked. The pen slipped loose in his hand. For a moment, the set, the crowd, the cameras, all of it fell away. He nodded once, tiny, almost involuntary. The audience didn't know the words, but they knew the weight. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It had form, substance, like something had shifted beneath the floorboards. "Okay," Jimmy said finally, voice careful, almost reverent. Chuck exhaled, steady, as if nothing more needed saying. And in living rooms across America, viewers leaned closer, wondering the same thing. What could he have whispered to change a man's face like that? The whisper was still echoing in Jimmy's head when he straightened his cards and tried to reset the rhythm. His hands, normally so precise, fumbled as the edges of paper caught against each other. The smile he forced looked stretched, teeth bright under the hot lights, but the skin around his eyes betrayed him. "All right," he said too briskly. "Let's move on. We've got a lot to cover." The words stumbled out without shape. He cleared his throat, tried again. "So, you've got this book, right? Health tips for men who—" He paused, shuffled for the next word. "Men who maybe don't have roundhouse kicks in their future." The line fell flat. A handful of people chuckled out of habit, but the sound died before it could travel across the room. The silence that followed wasn't clean. It was jagged, like broken glass. Jimmy laughed nervously, filling the gap. His voice cracked on the last note, a register higher than usual. He darted a glance at Chuck, then snapped his eyes back to the audience, desperate not to linger. His pen tapped twice against the desk, the rhythm uneven. Chuck sat still, upright but relaxed, shoulders back. His expression hadn't hardened, but softened. Barely. The corners of his mouth turned upward in the faintest smile, the kind that could be missed if you weren't watching closely. It wasn't triumphant, not mocking. It was the quiet smile of someone who already knew the ending to a story and didn't need to rush the telling. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Jimmy's words came faster now, tumbling over each other, his laughter dry, thin. He cracked another joke about Chuck's age, tossed it toward the audience like a lifeline. No one caught it. The crowd, which only minutes ago had been roaring with laughter, now sat hushed. They didn't boo, didn't heckle. They simply didn't give him what he needed. And the silence weighed more than disapproval. Camera operators shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. One lens stayed locked on Chuck, his calm profile sharp against the backdrop. Another hesitated, hovering between the host and the guest, unsure where the story lived. The red tally light wavered from one angle to the next, indecision visible to anyone who knew the language of a control room. The bandleader raised his trumpet, then lowered it again. His eyes flicked toward the booth, waiting for a signal that never came. The studio's usual hum, audience chatter, musical riffs, polished cues, was gone. Every sound that did surface felt magnified. The scrape of a chair leg, the intake of breath, the distant mechanical whir of a camera arm adjusting its position. Jimmy laughed again, weaker this time, as though by laughing he could trick the audience into following. He leaned on his desk, words running together. "Anyway, the point is, the book's great. Lots of tips. I'll probably need it myself. God knows the treadmill at my house is just a coat rack." He pointed at a random audience member forcing a grin. "Right? You too?" The man in the seat smiled politely, but didn't respond. The silence after that stretched until it bent. Jimmy's eyes darted sideways, back to Chuck. The smile faltered. He looked almost cautious, like a man who had approached a tiger thinking it was behind glass, only to realize the glass was missing. And Chuck, without moving much at all, owned the room. His faint smile remained, his hands resting calmly on his knees. His breathing was steady, chest rising and falling at the same pace it had all evening. He didn't reach for a microphone, didn't lean into the desk. He didn't need to. His stillness was louder than the host's words. The audience could feel it. They didn't laugh, but they didn't fidget either. They simply watched. For Jimmy, it was like standing on stage and realizing his lines had been erased. Every sentence he tried to build collapsed under its own weight. Every joke died before it left his mouth. He coughed lightly, forced brightness back into his tone. Okay, don't all laugh at once. I know, tough crowd tonight. We'll, take a quick break, then we'll come back and… The sentence never landed. The weight of the pause dragged it down. Chuck shifted again, barely, and the audience's eyes followed him instinctively. He didn't interrupt, didn't say a word. He just smiled, that faint, knowing smile, and the entire studio leaned his way without meaning to. Jimmy swallowed hard. His throat clicked audibly in the microphone. He laughed once more, a brittle sound, and adjusted his cards for the third time. But nothing he did could erase what everyone in the room already sensed. Something had changed. The man who usually bent a crowd to his rhythm with effortless timing now looked like he was trying to hold water in his hands. And the guest, silent, patient, unhurried, had taken the rhythm away with nothing more than a whisper and a glance. No one laughed. No one spoke. For the first time in years, Jimmy Kimmel wasn't running his show. And the audience, hundreds in the studio, millions at home, knew it. By morning, the clip was everywhere. News shows looped it between traffic and weather, running that close-up where Jimmy's face empties like a building losing power. On phones, in lines and subway cars, the same 15 seconds spiraled. The joke, the hush, the whisper you couldn't hear, the look you couldn't miss. Headlines tried voices, mocking, breathless, forensic. Chuck breaks Kimmel with a look. The words that stopped a show? What did he say? Producers booked panelists who hadn't been there. A cultural critic, a retired fighter, a body language expert with a new book. They slowed the footage, circled pupils and jawlines, mapped a pulse in Jimmy's throat as if it were seismic. One station ran a side-by-side with a decibel meter. Laughter, drop, flat line. Another stitched audience angles and caught the instant a woman in row 2 lifted her hands to her mouth and didn't know why. Online, it was louder. Meme factories woke first. Freeze frames, captions, edits where the whisper is replaced by a lion's roar or the opening chord of a metal song. Beneath the noise, another chorus gathered. Veterans of old theaters, sons who watched tapes with their fathers, people who'd trained in small gyms and knew how to be still. That was a warrior's look, one comment read, not anger. Permission withheld. Another, he didn't threaten him. He made him honest for 10 seconds. Speculation hardened into threads, threads into takes, takes into small wars. Was it a personal disclosure, the kind that makes jokes unlivable? A question too sharp to dodge? Something Jimmy had said off-camera and thought forgotten? Clips from Chuck's early interviews resurfaced. Low rooms, plastic ferns, the sound of tape. He'd always spoken like a man who keeps something in reserve. Now that reserve felt like the headline. The show's account posted nothing but a generic "thanks for watching." Staffers liked vacation photos as if the building weren't on fire. Reporters called the network. The network said the segment went great. Underneath, the video multiplied. Someone counted 18 million views before lunch on a sports site that never covered late night. By evening, a pastor in Tulsa and a comedian in Queens posted the same sentence. Silence is heavy when it's chosen. People who watched live described the room as if they'd survived weather. You could hear the AC, one wrote. I felt bad for laughing earlier, wrote another. Not because the joke was cruel. Because I realized I didn't understand who was in front of me. That became a refrain. We didn't understand. 10 seconds of quiet cracked a screen everyone thought they knew. The machine did what it always does, offered segments titled, "Let's lighten this up," and then didn't. Hosts replayed the clip and sat straighter. A rival network slipped in a soft jab, then pulled it back as if superstition applied. The one person who could reset the tone said nothing. Jimmy stayed off social, skipped the usual selfie, walked past a few photographers with his chin down, and let his publicist say "great" 3 times on the phone. Meanwhile, Chuck flew home and didn't tweet, didn't post, didn't call into any station. The absence wasn't a tactic, it felt like an ethic. In a week stuffed with noise, the quiet thing drew the most attention. The split in philosophy sharpened at office kitchens and in comment sections. One world needs a punchline every 12 seconds. The other can sit with a truth until it changes the room. People argued which was kinder, which was stronger, which built anything that lasted. By nightfall, the clip had a name: The Hush. It ran in bars without sound, and still every head turned when the whisper moment arrived. Parents texted grown kids, "Did you see this?" Past midnight, a crawler summed it in 6 words: Jimmy Kimmel stops. America leans in. What began as a gag drifted into something else, a national Rorschach everyone tried to read. And no one agreed on what the ink blot showed. It took 4 days before Jimmy addressed it. 4 shows where he dodged, filled time with skits, let other guests talk until credits rolled. Outside, the silence grew heavier than any punchline. Ratings didn't sink, they spiked. People tuned in not for jokes, but for an answer. That Thursday he walked on stage without his usual spring. The applause sign blinked, the crowd cheered, but his smile looked thin, rehearsed. He sat, shuffled cards, then pushed them aside. "Okay," he began. The word landed flat. "I know why you're here." The audience hushed faster than usual. The band stayed quiet. Jimmy exhaled, rubbed his forehead, then looked into camera 1. "Last week, you saw it. Everyone's seen it. I don't need to play it again. No laughter, just waiting." "I've been doing this a long time," he said. "Politicians, rock stars, athletes, you name it. And me? I always had the last word. That's the job." He paused. "But that night, for the first time, I didn't." The room was still. He tried to laugh. It came out broken. I can't repeat what he said. It wasn't meant for this room, not for television, but it stopped me cold. He leaned back, voice low. You ever have someone say something that feels like they're not talking to you, but through you? Like holding up a mirror? That's what it was. A ripple passed through the crowd. "I know you want the words, the secret, but all I can say is this." He hesitated. "What Chuck whispered? It wasn't a joke, and I'll never forget it." The silence swelled. Cameras cut to the audience. Faces strained forward, waiting, but no one clapped. Jimmy's eyes lifted again, stripped of his usual sharpness. He looked older, not tired, changed. "That's all I'll say." He tried to pivot, tossed out a wedding gag, gestured at the band. The trumpet came in late, shaky. The audience smiled politely, but the laughter never reignited. Across the country, living rooms held the same quiet. People replayed every second in their heads. If it wasn't a joke, then what? Why whisper it there, in front of millions? Chuck remained silent. No interviews, no tweets, no explanations. The absence only made the moment heavier. Late night thrived on noise, sarcasm, applause, headlines. Chuck had left quiet, and that quiet now thundered louder than any punchline. 2 men knew the truth. One spoke it, the other carried it. Everyone else was locked outside a door that wouldn't open. Jimmy's show went on, but the laughter felt thin. Every grin reminded viewers of that night, of the crack in his face. And they whispered the same question to each other. What did Chuck Norris say?